Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world, and welcome to the 2021 Goalmakers Conference. We are thrilled that you are here with us today, and welcome back if you were here yesterday for day one of the conference. I'm Kristen, Daly, the Executive Director of Global Washington, based in Seattle. And for those of you that don't know, Global Washington is a network of 165 nonprofit and for-profit organizations working to improve lives in low and middle income countries. We promote our members and connect our members to enhance their work. And this is what the Global Washington Conference is all about. This is our 13th annual conference, which we now call the Goalmakers Annual Conference. And this is to really recognize those of you that contribute to advance the Sustainable Development Goals around the world. Our Goalmakers are global development practitioners from all sectors who are devoted to building a more equitable world. Goalmakers are really driven by the fact that we want global development to be more effective, more inclusive, and country-led. We're here at this conference today to examine what we've learned over the past 19 months when COVID first started, and to determine what we should keep from this period of time, what we should change, and what we should redefine in our work to improve lives. Yesterday was filled with some amazing speakers and thoughtful participants. Thank you all for your activity. We asked that yesterday what your favorite part of the day was, and many of you said the networking. So we're going to have more networking today. We encourage all of you to be active on the Whova app. And to continue asking questions during the conversation, and use the chat. You should see the chat bar next to you right now in Whova. Go ahead and type in your name and affiliation, where you're watching from. We want to also build community as we're talking, and you can put comments in there as you're listening to speakers as well. There will be some sessions where you'll be actively asking questions to the speaker later on. It's the breakout sessions that we have a little later on today. And in those sessions in particular, we really want you to type in questions, and then we'll pull those questions in for the speakers to answer. So let's get started with today's speakers today. I'll do a brief introduction, but again, in your Whova frame, you'll be able to click on their names and see their full bios. First up, we have a conversation, a fireside chat between Ankur Vora and Sara Rogge, both from the Gates Foundation. Ankur is the Chief Strategy Officer at the Gates Foundation, where he serves as the principal advisor to the co-chairs, the CEO, and the executive leadership team. He really advises around the overall strategic opportunities and risks for the foundation's priorities. Prior to this role, he worked as the Director of Programs at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation in London, and he's also worked at the Boston Consulting Group. Ankur will be joined by Sara Rogge, who is a Global Washington board member and the Director of the Office of the President and Chief of Staff for the Global Policy and Advocacy Division at the Gates Foundation. Sara provides strategic advice for the foundation's relationships with governments, NGOs, and other key partners. Prior to this role, Sara worked in Washington, D.C. as the Deputy Policy Director for the One Campaign and worked at USTR in market access. I'll now invite both Ankur and Sara to the virtual stage for our conversation.
All right, I think we're there.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here at this virtual Goalmakers conference. I've attended both virtually and in person Global Washington's previous conferences. And so I'm excited actually to introduce one of my colleagues to Global Washington who hasn't had the experience yet. So I'm really delighted to have Ankur here. So we're going to spend a few minutes just kind of talking a little bit about what the foundation has been thinking about over the last year, as we've all had to deal with some new and challenging circumstances in our work. And also just kind of how Ankur in his role approaches how we think about strategy and the topics that we take on at the foundation. So so I'm going to just kick off with a couple questions, and looking forward to getting a little bit deeper on this. So Ankur, something you and I both been at the foundation for a while. Something we hear a lot is, why isn't the foundation doing something on X or Y? And how come you're going so deep on polio or vaccine development or agriculture in the ways that you are? So as the Chief Strategy Officer of the foundation, how do you help to guide and approach some of those questions and think about what are the things that we take on and what are the things that we, with so many challenges in our world, the things that we can't?
First of all, thank you, Sara, for inviting me to this fireside chat conversation. There is no fire here, but we'll make believe. And thank you, Kristen, for organizing this amazing conference. And just thank you to everybody who's listening for everything that you do to make the world a better place. We need many more people like you to do their bit. So I'm excited. Sara, going back to your question, it's interesting. I'm glad you framed it that way, because over the course of my tenure at the foundation, I used to get this question a lot, but I think so there was more about curiosity at a point in time. I think now there is a bit of an implicit statement that I think you should be doing more, you should be doing differently, you should change your portfolio. And it comes from a very good place, because there are so many needs in the world right now, and everybody believes that we can do more and we should be doing more. And it's a tough place to be in, because I think so the amount of resources, the amount of effort that one can put in is just not sufficient to the needs in the world. And so at some point, everybody needs to make choices. I think so everybody in this audience is making choices in terms of where they put their energy, where they donate their money, where they do their bit. And I think so we're doing the same stuff. And so to me, it boils down to sort of two different things. One is, it's a little bit of what's the burden? What's the pool of impact? What's the harm that's being done in the world that one can address? And so we look at that. We are data-driven, evidence-driven. We will look at sort of, where are children under 5 dying, and what are the causes of the death? And if a lot of deaths are happening in northern Nigeria, we'll say, okay, let's think about that place. And so that's one part, which is the burden part. And then the other part is, what's our role? Because every cause in the world, at some point in time, you have to make a choice in terms of, why am I in this sector? And we go in and we say that, so there's one thing which is very interesting about us, which is a good and a bad, which is when we enter a sector as the Gates Foundation, we're committed for a fairly long time. And it's a good thing, because we come in with a lot of money. We're sort of the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to philanthropy. And that means you could disrupt the sector, you could swing the sector. And if you're going to go in and out on a whim, that's actually not, that's just not good for the ecosystem. And so we go in, we're there for a fairly long time. And so that means the decision to enter a new sector is a very hard decision, because it's very thoughtfully done. The other thing is that where markets are broken, like private capital is going to flow into places where economics make sense. Where it doesn't make sense, so if you think about like vaccines right now, the world didn't have to do a lot of stuff for developing vaccines for the US. We had to put in a lot of effort to figure out, how do you make sure those vaccines get to Africa, get to India, get to places where otherwise it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years. And so there's a version of this, which is, where are the markets broken? And so that's sort of the way we think about it. And often we say, like, is there a place? Let me give you an example, which is, and I'll do the last bit and then I'll shut up. But there are lots of people who are, access to financial services is a great thing, but it's very difficult to bank the unbanked, because the reason is that the amount of capital that they have, the cost of banking the unbanked is much more expensive than sort of, one could afford. So what we go in and say, like, is there a way to leapfrog that situation? Going in and doing sort of retail work is not in our competitive advantage. And so we'd go in and say, like, is there a way to leapfrog this by creating a digital platform, which is lower cost, which everybody has access to through their phones? And so that's the way we think about it, which is, take it very, very seriously in terms of, because once you enter, you have to stay there for a long time. Think about the burden, think about if you have a role or not. And I think we make choices, and I think everybody has a different view in terms of where they would make a slightly different choice. And so it's always a evolving conversation.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned, actually, I'm really glad you mentioned the financial inclusion piece, because I think it's one of the things that I think as an organization, we realized in the pandemic was a place where we could actually do a bit more, right? Because because digital transactions for just enabled, better transfer of payments, better access to benefits for people that were trying to receive stimulus payments, et cetera, from governments. It was one element of how we approached COVID. And so I think the second question I'd ask you is, you talked a little bit previously about how we think about that. We've been an organization that has invested a lot in global health over the years, but we had this pandemic that so even though I think Bill has talked about this as something that we needed to be prepared for, all of a sudden we were in the midst of it. And so and we have all these other things that we, as you said, go deep on and plan on trying to have a really big impact on, whether it's agriculture or malaria. And so how did you see the organization shift and balance priorities as COVID became sort of the thing that we all had to think about?
Yeah, COVID's been hard, and for an organization like ours, and for like people like you and me, we're generally optimists in the world. We see the glass as half full. There's lots to be done, but we've been on a positive trend. If you look at children under 5 dying, or you look at poverty rates in the world over the last 20, 30 years, like we've seen just amazing progress. And then to have this moment over the course of the last 18 months, where for the first time in a very, very long time, the trend started to first stall and then it started to reverse. And it made sense that it was reversing because people were losing jobs. The prices of food started going up, so food insecurity increased. You couldn't deliver babies, or mothers couldn't deliver babies in a health facility in rural India or rural Nigeria because of COVID, things had to be shut down. And so suddenly you started seeing a change in the trend line, or children couldn't get vaccinated. And so there was a bit around, what do we do about that situation in itself? And so in lots of places, we worked with government partners or with partners on the ground and said, like, what is the emergency stuff one could do? How could we make sure that oxygen is available in every health facility? And so you could go and you go and you break down the problem and you say, what's the oxygen problem? And so you break it down and you figure out if there are roadblocks that one could fix. And so you do things like that. Education. Everybody on this call probably has kids, knows somebody whose kid's life got disrupted, teachers whose lives got disrupted. And I think so what we ended up doing in all of these situations was, one, any immediate fixes, any immediate ways one could help the situation. And then the second thing is like to see, are there ways we could use this moment to sort of try to push us to be even better in the future? And so digitization of people to track, who got vaccines or not in India, like that's going to be a public good that's going to be helpful for a very, very long time. And we focused on that. Everybody in the US and high-income countries is trying to figure out, or even in India, trying to figure out, how do we educate our children in a moment where schools are not open? And so people started getting very, very creative and creating online modules, trying to figure out ways to enable teachers to be able to do their bits. And so helped all of those things. So there's a whole version of just trying to do whatever one can in this moment. Yeah. And you talked about the financial services piece, which was kind of again, it was a great thing. It was a great thing for organizations or for countries that had the infrastructure. So either you had a digital ID infrastructure, and you had a benefits registry, and you had a transactions infrastructure, then you could do governments to people payments very, very quickly. And it was great, and it was very efficient. And it was a moment to scale that up in the world, so that in the future, we are going to have an infrastructure that's going to help a lot with sort of social benefits.
Yeah. The group of folks that are participating in this conference are, are NGOs, private sector, academia. I think you and I, as people that have been at the foundation for a long time, I think our top of mind, I think for both of us is always that our grantees and our partners are the way that we have impact. We can't, we are the facilitators of that, and the investors in that. So I know you have been thinking a lot about how we think about our partnerships and our grantees and how that needs to evolve. I think something that's top of mind for anyone in this sector is, how do we get closer to the work? How do we get closer to the ground? How do we get better feedback and make sure that we're investing in the right thing? So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you're approaching that, how you're thinking about our organization's role in that.
I like how you started with the fact that we're facilitators. I'd even go stronger. Like, there is no pathway to impact that doesn't go through our partners. And so in some sense, who we work with, how we work with them, and how they work with sort of the stakeholders and the beneficiaries on the ground is probably as equal or even more important than sort of what you work on and what's your technical solution. So if you start with that as the basis, then you start asking questions like, who are the people you work with? Who are the partners you work with? And yeah, I think everybody in the sector is learning and evolving. On some level, we're a large organization that seems to be fairly mature, but on the other hand, we're 20 years old. And in the history of an organization, in the first 5-10 years, we're really learning. And we've had to learn a lot about choices we've made and the consequences of that. And I think so we're pivoting on that. So I'll talk about 2 choices that, if you'd asked me this question 10 years back, I would have given you a different answer. So one is impatience. And I love impatience because there is so much that one can do in the world. And so trying to wait, like, impatience is a virtue. And what that led to, which was working with partners who were ready, partners who had the boots on the ground, had the ability to do stuff. And so you ended up working with them a lot more. And that was a good thing from one lens, but there's a downside to that, and I'll come to that. The other one was scale. We didn't want small scale stuff. We wanted to see, like, what are the players who actually have reach across multiple geographies, who are, so impatience and scale together effectively meant you started working with large organizations who often were from high-income countries or from the global north, whatever language you want to use. And it might have been a good thing from an impatience and from a scale perspective, but it was fairly bad from the perspective of what you were missing out. The opportunity cost of doing that meant you were not investing sufficiently in the capacity on the ground. You were missing on the context in a lot of situations. You were missing on sustainability. And so that's definitely one area that, as you know, everybody in the foundation, everybody in philanthropy, everybody in development is thinking about. And I'm kind of excited about it because the conversation has changed. And that means we're going to invest a lot more in developing stronger capacity, which is going to be great. Like, and Sara, you work on the polio program, trying to eradicate polio in Pakistan or the Afghanistan border, without developing really, really, really strong ties with the Pashtun community over there and having NGOs over there working on that program. It just feels like a suboptimal move. And so I'm quite excited about it. It's not just a smart thing to do, it's also the right thing to do.
We've got a couple minutes left. And so one of the things that I always enjoy talking to you about when we've worked together over the past several years is just asking you what you're thinking about, what changes, what trends, as the Chief Strategy Officer, do you think we need to be prepared to respond to? So I know you always have great ideas on this. So if you're willing to share a couple of them, I think it'd be great.
And can I share them more as sort of me as a human being? Because
Absolutely.
there's a set of stuff, as I said in the first answer, like we're very cautious about new areas we enter into, and but I definitely am looking at the board and there's a whole bunch of stuff. So the one that is very live, both for the organization, for the world, and on my mind is climate change. But from a different lens. I think so everybody is thinking a lot about mitigation. I think so the problem for people who are working in global development is adaptation. Sort of 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees rise. We're talking about like in the belt, sub-Saharan belt, like we're talking about it's going to happen. And when it happens, agriculture is going to get completely disrupted. If we don't find solutions to that very, very soon, we're going to increase the food insecurity in the world. And this is the belt of people where actually poverty rates are really, really high. And an additional shock is not going to be, it's going to be quite devastating. And so like trying to figure out what one can do about climate adaptation, especially for smallholder farmers is a big thing. When I started in global health, the other one is infectious diseases or communicable diseases was the big thing, because that's what people were dying from. And everybody thought sort of non-communicable diseases like diabetes and hypertension and cardiovascular disease, like they were diseases of the rich world. Nobody in developing countries or obesity. Turns out that if you start looking at the data, NCDs, non-communicable diseases, are actually rising, and they're rising at a faster clip in the low middle income countries. So something that seemed to be a problem much further out might be at our doorsteps much earlier. And so, and again, Gates Foundation does a little bit of work in it, and things like sort of some cancers, but generally less so. But that's the second one. Mental health has been a topic that has risen a lot, has come into prominence, and it's going to be a hard one because there are no easy solutions on this one. There are no silver bullets, no easy fixes. And so we're going to, a lot of stuff on equity and inclusion. And so what I mean by that is we talked about the partner stuff, like how we do development is going to change. Who is in the driver's seat? How is the balance of power shifting? Like that's, and we're all going to have to reckon with that. And so that's a shift. And then the last one I talk about, and probably it's a good one to end on, is we all care about inequalities, and that's why we exist. So gender inequality has been, like it's just unacceptable that we are in the world we are in right now. And I think I'm excited about the shift in the trend line. It's not fast enough, it's not good enough, but I'm excited that we're going to do more about it.
Great. Thank you, Ankur. And I, as always, your blend of sort of optimism and rigor, I think two things that we call out as important values for the foundation came through. It certainly came through for me, and I hope to everybody else. So thank you for coming and for sharing with us today.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Sara, thank you so much. Ankur, thank you so much for that conversation. That was a really great way to start our day, get into our headspace, think strategically. It was very interesting to hear more about the complexity of your decision making. And I love your quote to use this moment to be better in the future. I think that's what this conference is all about, really reflecting on the past, but really looking for the future and how we can all do our work better. So we're going to transition now to our next fireside chat between Jay Meseck, who's formerly of Microsoft, and Bettina Stix from Amazon. Again, I'll do a very brief introduction, and again, click on their bio in Whova so you can see more. Jane is a global Washington board member and was recently the senior director at Microsoft Philanthropies, and has been in our community for over 30 years in philanthropy. Jane was Microsoft's global lead for humanitarian programs and partnerships, and is currently still on the board of the US board for UNHCR. Bettina is the director of Right Now Needs and is the impetus behind Amazon's disaster relief program that you'll hear about. Bettina started at Amazon in 1999 and has also led the website team for both Germany and France prior to her current role way back when she started. She's also on the board of Fair Start in Seattle. So I'll turn it over to you, Jane, to start the conversation.
Thanks, Kristen, and hello, everyone. And yes, I am a proud Global Washington board member and really happy to be here today. And I hope everyone enjoyed yesterday. Shout out to the team. They did a great job. As Kristen mentioned, I just wrapped up a 25-year career at Microsoft, where I was on Microsoft Philanthropies team, and I primarily focused on work and initiatives on nonprofits and humanitarian organizations and how they use technology for their mission. Disaster response and relief was always a part of my portfolio, but increasingly so towards the end of my tenure, to the point in the last 2 years, it was my full-time job in terms of leading our global humanitarian action work. And that was because, you know, we all recognized, of course, there was COVID, and that was a big part of it. And my team led a lot of the work on our COVID response. But, you know, we all recognize that there's an increasing number of crises right now. There's an increasing intensity of those crises. And increasingly, there's a disproportionate impact of those crises on our most vulnerable communities. So as a humanitarian sector, nonprofits, governments, corporations, academia, we all recognize the need to rethink how we respond to crisis and how we work more collaboratively and how we do so in a more community-led way. From a corporate point of view, you know, there was a growing recognition that corporations not only have the responsibility to support the communities where their employees live and work and where they have significant business, but also that corporations have really core strengths and assets that can be mobilized to make a difference when it comes to preparedness, response, and rebuilding and crisis. So today we're going to do a little bit of a case study on Amazon and how they as a corporation have approached the changing world of disaster response, how they identified the problem, how they're working through, and how they're mobilizing their stakeholders to make a difference. And so I'd like to introduce Bettina. I know Kristen just did an introduction, but I'd like to first welcome back from vacation, Bettina. I think you got back yesterday, so you're refreshed and your brain's here, I'm sure. But maybe you can introduce yourself and your team for a couple minutes.
Sure. Yeah. So I have been at Amazon not as long as Jane had been at Microsoft, only 23 years, which makes us both a little bit dinosaurs, and that's one. I also, over the years, we've been working with Global Washington so closely. I really want to thank Kristen for the opportunity to be here. I miss, like probably everybody else, not being in person and having the opportunity to network directly. It's always been one of the highlights of the year to kind of reach out and speak to like-minded people, and good conversations have happened and relationships have been built over the years. I've been working at Amazon for a long time, but about 5 years ago, I started becoming part of Amazon in the community. And as the name says, we're really focused on helping communities around the world be healthier and thrive. Part of this is that we look at how can we create affordable housing, how can we help educate children for the jobs of the future, but also to a degree, how can we make sure that they're resilient? You know, what can we do to help them overcome disasters, become more resilient, and help them in what I call the everyday disaster, which is what we call right now needs. You know, people being food insecure, not having the basic items to live, not being in a state to even kind of like, you know, put their head out of the water and thrive.
Excellent, excellent. So really quick, Amazon versus AWS. You want to clarify the difference so folks have it in their head, who you are versus AWS? Yeah, so
we're obviously one company, but when it comes to disaster relief, we actually have two teams. In my team is what we call disaster relief, is really focused on the logistics and what can we do in bringing highly needed items quickly and delivering aid really, really quickly to substantially make a difference in a short period of time. AWS also wants to be helping the communities quickly, but does more so by being efficiently speeding up response capabilities with AWS services and infrastructure.
Fantastic. So you mentioned 5 years ago. So let's go back in time to almost 2017, I think, and share a little bit about the genesis of the work. What problem did you see? So this is almost like a theory of change exercise I'm going to take you through. What was the problem you saw? And describe how you thought Amazon really could be positioned to make a difference, and how did you go about getting this up off the ground?
First of all, I may have seen the challenge, but so have our customers, for example. And so since we're always with the pulse on what our customers see, we noticed that there was just an increasingly an ask from our employees and customers to help in disasters. Because, you know, as company, we're known for delivering items fast, right? Like, just like simplify the challenge that we felt like we can help solve. You know, there's all these statistics about, like, the faster you help in a disaster, the shorter the recovery path will be. And what we've noticed is that while organizations are usually well prepared for one disaster, there's always this mass of like unknowns, or they need more than they thought they had. And then they go like, probably lots of nonprofit here on the call today know this challenge, then where to get that stuff, right? Then you have to have suppliers, and you need to negotiate on transportation and on customs and all of that. What we can actually do, what we figured out is we could, if we really put our energy behind it, be a one-stop solution for on-demand help. And so yeah, go ahead.
So I'm curious, you know, when you looked at that problem and you saw, and you felt that Amazon had those core strengths to really make a difference, was it a hard sell with your executives, or did they jump on, or did you have to do some selling?
Well, so we have processes at Amazon to get these ideas bubbled up. I was myself involved in some of the campaigns we run with our customers, where we just transformed payment services quickly into donate services. And so there is, you know, as we know, in a crisis like that, leadership is willing to help and gets really emotional about it. It's sense to ask them outside of the cycle, right? Like, and say, like, this takes time. You really have to build connections and relationships. But we have processes at Amazon to do that. So you write a working backwards document, and you show your idea to people. And I was actually surprised myself by how what chord it struck with a lot of people, especially in our operations departments, who wanted help. And so we started really humble. It was just a small team, but we're able to just quickly gain the support and then be ready when the disasters came around in 2007, when we started. And I don't know, probably many on the call remember 2017 as one of those years. Jane, you probably do. Multiple disasters at one stroke, you know, like 3 major hurricanes in the Atlantic seasons of unprecedented scale.
Throw in a couple of earthquakes. Yeah, that was a fun year.
You know, and everything hit at the same time. So it kind of put our concept to the test pretty quickly, and but gained also then, you know, it was sort of like we were validated in what we thought we were good at, and so could build on that and build relationships from there.
Great. So when talk a little bit about kind of what strategies or activities that are your go-to things, whether it's preparedness or response. Talk a little bit about those strategies.
Yeah, so when we think about strategies, is like Ankur said, what really resonated with me, what he said earlier. Want to just go back to that. What he says, like, nonprofits are a pathway of impact. So we know, like, it's the same. It's true for disaster relief. If you think about this, our partners are the ones on the ground. I think where we kind of like differ from the Gates Foundation is we really want to solve the problems together with them. We know that a lot of nonprofits are already good in certain things, and we always go back and say, like, don't tell us what you're good at. We can read about, we can study that up. We want to really hear what you don't write in your annual report. What kind of help do you need? Where does your supply chain break down? How can we help you solve these problems? And so from that, we constantly innovate and try to build, adapt and learn from each disaster. Abe on my team, who leads the disaster relief efforts, has like weekly calls with his core partners to really figure out what works, what doesn't, what's the word on the street, how can we help them improve their processes and go around. One of these improvements was definitely, we heard loud and clear from key partners that pre-positioning items is a challenge on many ways. You don't have the space. B, you may not know what you need. So what do you pre-position? C, then when you have it somewhere, you need to quickly mobilize people to get it on the way. And that all is, if your mission is humanitarian help generally, you're not a logistic company.
Right. Logistic and supply chain is you.
Right. And so we thought like, wow, we can help with that. And then we really worked through the problem. And sometimes we have to work on this together. Also, Ankur mentioned like being data driven. For example, one thing we always heard is like every disaster is different. We always need different things. And like one thing we had to say to our partners is like, no, you're not. The last 4 disasters, you asked us exactly for the same things. So how about we start with those? So that you can always access them easily because you seem to need them in every disaster.
When we think about our work in the community, we often think about our core assets, our expertise in technology, right? Our voice, a little bit of cash, and our employees. Talk a little bit about the role employees play in your disaster relief effort. Then I'm going to ask a question to give an example of how it all comes together. Give me an example.
Yeah. So first of all, I was so surprised when we talked about how I made this proposal that Amazon should get involved. Mm-hmm. I basically was surprised by the obvious. I was an employee that was involved, and I took so much pride out of it. Mm-hmm. I was so proud that I could stand on the shoulders of this giant Amazon and really move something. I have totally underestimated that I wouldn't be the only one. So when a disaster strikes, we have lots of people that want to be engaged, especially in our operations field, in our fulfillment centers, and our delivery stations. And so my team really focuses on making sure that we have these requests from our partners ready for them, right? So we partner with our operation partners and delivery partners to help in, let's say there's a wildfire in California, they know we transform delivery stations, help farm out requests from the community to them, so that everybody can work in lockstep. We also have small teams, like doing on, say, in COVID times, we can offer people tools to help us shop, so to speak, quote unquote, for nonprofits. There's lots of like little things where employees can get easily involved, and we see ourselves as the facilitators for them to do that.
Right. I think one of the other things about employees is that, they're around the world and they know their communities best. And when you want to be community led, engaging your employees at that local level is key to that, right? Because they know the community, they then know the partners. So do you have an example of when a crisis struck and your partnerships and your employees all came together in some way?
Yeah. So like so since it's the pandemic, I'll use a recent one. When India was hit by the second wave of COVID, we knew that that we could leverage our network of suppliers that we have at Amazon. We could network our fulfillment and our logistics to quickly get what was most needed, which was medical equipment to India. So, and it basically happened. What makes me so proud, it happened almost completely outside of my team. So I mentioned Abe before on the team. He's been instrumental of kind of quickly getting on board with everybody, looking into kind of like, how can we help? What are the processes that we can replicate? How we do this and be like silently managing the strings in the background? But it was really the India team.
Yeah.
and India people that stemmed up this amazing response, and we got $5 million worth of hospital equipment out to
That's amazing.
hospitals.
That's amazing. Yeah, I often tell nonprofits that the best way to engage, and maybe this will be a part of your call to action at the end, is to get to know the local office and the local people, because that's where the action happens. So I know we only have a couple more minutes, so I want to ask you, I love the question that Sara asked Ankur, is what are you thinking about what's next? What's on your mind? How are you getting ahead of what's next? Because again, things are increasing, crisis, impact, vulnerable communities. How are we keeping up with that and getting ahead? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so you know, I'm such an inside Amazon person that my personal mantra is always to figure out how can I put what Amazon is good at to use for the communities. I think about this as the second return of investment. So whatever problem, whatever challenge I see in the world, I think like, wait a minute, is there something that, you know, I can, you know, surface out of the tools that we have. I think like from a personal level, I think we're all, this is obviously Global Washington, and there's lots of people on the call. Climate change and the effects of climate change on equity are one of the things that personally really are close to me. So I wish we could find partners that we can partner with and put what Amazon is good at to use of that. We're really early in thinking about how we can be doing sustainability. We have already a couple of things where we know we can be influential, like we're not sending out water bottles. We're kind of trying to get to water filtration system. So we leverage, so to speak, our voice in this to kind of get to more sustainable disaster relief, but we want to do more in that space.
That's great. That's great.
For equity, I think we can help mainly through education. So there's lots of ways, like if you think of putting Amazon people to good use, it's to kind of you know, something that Microsoft has done over the years well with the TEALS program. It's also what could we uniquely do to help children you know, get a better, more equitable start in society.
Brilliant. That's great. So in our last minute, give a call to action. How can folks on this call that are listening in engage with Amazon's work?
Yeah, well, I would say first thing is like go to aboutamazon.com. That is sort of our website for all things Amazon that are not products, and search for disaster relief. Familiarize yourself a little bit with the thing that we actually do, how we're leveraging things, and then see if there's something that you feel actually would help solve some of the problems that you are dealing with.
Fantastic. Any closing marks? They haven't shut us down yet, so we might have 2 seconds.
Well, I want to thank everybody who is actually doing work in the humanitarian sector, especially in the global world. I understand, you know, like we all know, we're part of a global economy. I want to make sure that what we do does help, not harm. So ask us for things that are really helping and not harming. You know, no stunts, ask of us. So share with us what innovation you would like to see in the world, and hopefully we can
Great.
Together.
Great. Thank you, Bettina. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us. It was a great conversation, Bettina. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both so much. That was so great. I know that was very fast paced, but fantastic introduction. Bettina, as always, and Abe on her team are fantastic community members for Global Washington. So next up, everyone watching the audience, is our infamous Global Washington Fast Pitch, which is always a highlight of our conference. Please navigate in your agenda and click on the Fast Pitch session that will be starting in just 1 minute. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next session.